8:42 p.m., the 28th floor of a glass skyscraper. Most lights have flickered out, leaving only a few islands of blue glow. Daniel Brooks, a 41-year-old project manager and single father, is gathering his things. His shirt is wrinkled. His coffee is cold. Just as he reaches for his bag, the CEO's door swings open. Claire Donovan, the woman who never sleeps, stares at him. She checks her watch, then his tired eyes. "Do you want to stay tonight?" she asks, half joking, half serious. Daniel pauses. He smiles, and his short response makes the most powerful woman in the building laugh out loud. Listen to this. Now, Daniel Brooks was a man of steel and silence. At 41, his life was a masterpiece of careful planning, a constant battle between the demands of the city and the needs of a small home. He had been a senior project manager at Donovan Tech for nearly 5 years. In an industry that worshipped the 90-hour work week and total immersion, Daniel was an outlier. He was the one who arrived exactly at 8:30 a.m., executed his tasks with surgical precision, and vanished the moment the clock hit 5. To the younger, ambitious VPs, Daniel was a mystery. They saw a man who didn't attend the late-night networking drinks or post hustle quotes on social media. They assumed he lacked the killer instinct needed for the top floor. They didn't see the man who spent his evenings building cardboard rocket ships or helping with complex long division. They didn't see the man who had learned that the most important deliverable of the day was a bedtime story told in a soft, steady voice. Daniel was a single father. 3 years ago, his world had been hollowed out when his wife, Sarah, passed away after a brave battle with illness. Since that day, his priorities had shifted fundamentally. He remembered the hospital corridors and the cold beep of monitors, sounds that made the corporate noise feel utterly insignificant. He had once been a man who stayed in the office until midnight, but now he measured success by the warmth of his 10-year-old daughter Emma's smile. He chose Donovan Tech specifically because the role was stable. He needed to be the father who was at the school gate, not the one who sent a text message from a boardroom across the ocean. Claire Donovan, the CEO, was the polar opposite. At 38, she was a titan of the tech world. She was brilliant, surgically decisive, and notoriously relentless. To her, the office wasn't just a place to work, it was a sanctuary. She was almost always the last person to leave, often seen through the glass walls of her office at 10 p.m., illuminated by the cold glow of 3 monitors. In her eyes, passion was measured in hours, and dedication was measured in sacrifice. Her employees respected her, feared her, but none of them truly knew her. Lately, the pressure had reached a boiling point. The company was 2 weeks away from launching Project Horizon, a cloud infrastructure platform that would define their next decade. The entire department was on a war footing. Sleep was a luxury. Nerves were frayed. Even the air in the office felt heavy with the scent of burnt coffee, industrial floor wax, and impending deadlines. Daniel had been working at his absolute limit. He hadn't seen Emma for a proper dinner in 3 days, and the guilt was starting to weigh on him more than the project requirements. He had come in early today to finish the risk assessment reports, hoping to catch a window of peace before the chaos of the day began. As he stood at his desk that evening, finally sliding his laptop into his bag, he felt the exhaustion in his bones. He checked his phone. A message from the babysitter. "Emma fell asleep on the sofa waiting for you. She said she has a new drawing to show the project manager." Daniel sighed, a sharp, familiar pang of regret hitting his chest. He turned to leave, but the sudden click of a door handle stopped him in his tracks. Claire Donovan stepped out into the dim hallway, her silhouette sharp against the city lights behind her. The interaction that was about to happen would change the way she looked at her office and her life forever. The silence of the 28th floor was absolute. The only sound was the distant hum of the ventilation system and the muffled sirens of New York City far below. Claire walked toward the break room, her heels clicking a rhythmic, tired beat on the polished floor. She stopped when she saw the light still on at Daniel's desk. She looked at her watch. It was nearly 8:45 p.m., and then at Daniel. She noticed the slight slump in his shoulders and the way he clutched his bag like a shield. She had been on a conference call with investors for 4 hours, and she was in no mood for pleasantries. She was in execution mode, and anyone still in the building was an asset to be used. "Mr. Brooks," she began, her voice carrying that familiar, icy authority. "I just reviewed the integration logs. We're still seeing a 3% lag in the secondary server response. The team is struggling with the handoff protocol." Daniel turned, offering a polite, weary nod. "I saw the logs, Claire. I've already drafted the fix. It's in your inbox. It just needs the final verification from the DevOps lead in the morning." Claire didn't look satisfied. She leaned against the edge of a nearby desk, crossing her arms. She looked out at the skyline, her eyes reflecting the cold amber of the streetlights. She felt the crushing weight of the launch, the expectations of the board, and her own self-imposed standard of perfection. She looked back at Daniel, her expression softening just a fraction, but her mind was still focused on the machinery. "The board is breathing down my neck," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "They want a zero-error margin by Friday. I'm planning to stay through the night to run the stress tests manually." She paused, looking at Daniel with a look that was half command and half invitation. "Do you want to stay tonight? We could clear the bottleneck by sunrise if we both put our heads together. I could use your perspective on the logic gates. You have a way of seeing the gaps I miss." To anyone else in the company, this was the golden opportunity. Being invited by Claire Donovan to a private late-night strategy session was the fastest way to a promotion. It was a sign of being in the inner circle. Most of the VPs would have canceled their anniversary dinners or their kids' birthdays for this moment. They would have seen it as a test of loyalty. Daniel understood the gravity of the question. He knew that saying no might be seen as a lack of ambition. He knew that Claire worshipped the all-in mentality. He looked at the elevator, then at his phone, thinking of Emma asleep on the sofa. He felt the pull of the career he had once chased so hard. But then he remembered the new drawing mentioned in the text. He remembered the promise he had made to Emma that they would make pancakes together if he made it home. He realized that Claire wasn't asking him to work. She was asking him to join her in her isolation. She was asking him to believe that the 28th floor was the only world that mattered. Daniel took a slow, grounding breath. He didn't look away from her. He saw the Ice Queen mask, but he also saw the deep circles under her eyes. He saw a woman who was winning at business but losing at being a person. He decided he wasn't going to give her a corporate excuse. He was going to give her the truth, wrapped in the only thing that could break the tension of a tech launch, a bit of perspective. "I'd love to help you with those logic gates, Claire," Daniel said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his fatigue. He shifted his bag to his other shoulder and looked her straight in the eye. "But if I stay, I'm afraid my daughter might take drastic measures. If I'm not home in 30 minutes, she's likely to promote herself to CEO of our apartment. And believe me, her first order of business will be to fire me for gross negligence of the pancake protocol." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of tension, it was the silence of pure surprise. Claire stared at him, her mouth slightly open, the Iron Lady of Tech momentarily stunned into speechlessness by a joke about pancakes and a 10-year-old girl. The shock on Claire's face lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then something happened that Daniel hadn't seen in the 5 years he had worked for her. She didn't scoff. She didn't check her phone. She let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, then another. Within seconds, the CEO of Donovan Tech was actually laughing, a genuine, rich sound that echoed off the glass walls of the empty office. She leaned back against the desk, shaking her head. "The pancake protocol?" she managed to say, wiping a small tear of amusement from her eye. "Is that a formal agreement? Because it sounds remarkably binding." "It's a Tier 1 contract," Daniel laughed. "No loopholes, no extensions. If I miss the window, the litigation involves a lot of glitter and a very disappointed teddy bear. It's a high-stakes environment, Claire, much more dangerous than the board of directors." Claire's laughter subsided, but the smile remained, a soft, human expression that completely transformed her face. She looked at Daniel, really looking at him for the first time. She didn't see a project manager or an underperformer. She saw a man who had his feet on the ground while her own were dangling 40 floors up in the air. "She's 10, right?" "Emma?" Claire asked, her voice losing its professional edge entirely. Daniel nodded. 10 going on 25. She's the smartest person I know. She told me yesterday that if I keep making the same coffee-breath excuses for being late, she's going to start charging me emotional interest on our weekend time. Claire looked down at her hands. I think I would have liked her. I was a bit like that at 10. My father, he was the CEO before me. He lived in this room. I remember sitting in the lobby for 3 hours once, just waiting for him to finish a meeting so he could take me to get ice cream. He eventually forgot I was there. He sent his assistant to take me home. You're the most efficient person on my staff, yet you're the only one who refuses to let this place swallow you whole. How do you stay so calm when everything is on fire? I follow one schedule at a time, Daniel explained. When I'm here, I'm 100% yours. I give you every bit of my brain. But when I'm at the elevator, I switch servers. I become the dad server. I've realized that the company will still be here in the morning, but Emma won't be 10 forever. Kids don't care about your titles, Claire. They don't care about your quarterly growth or your exit strategy. They only care about the fact that you showed up when you said you would. He paused, looking at the door to her office. I'm not saying the work isn't important. It is, but it's not the most important thing. The work is just the fuel for the life. If you spend all your time gathering fuel and never actually drive the car, what's the point? Claire was silent for a long time. She thought about her empty apartment, her cold dinner waiting in the fridge, and the hundreds of birthdays and anniversaries she had missed in the name of market dominance. She realized that for years, she had been building a monument to a father who had never seen her. And in doing so, she had become a stranger to herself. She looked at Daniel, a new kind of respect in her eyes. It wasn't the respect you give to a high performer. It was the respect you give to a teacher who knows the secret to a well-lived life. You're right, she whispered. The monitors don't have a heartbeat, and I'm tired of talking to them. She walked over to her desk, picked up her bag, and did something she hadn't done in a decade. She reached out and turned off the lights in her office. She didn't check the server status one last time. She didn't send one final email. She just closed the door. All right, Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice now firm but full of a new, vibrant energy. The project horizon can wait until 8:30 tomorrow morning. We'll manage the deadlines without burning everyone to a crisp. If the servers can't handle a night without us, then we didn't build them well enough anyway. She walked with him toward the elevator, the clicking of her heels sounding less like a march and more like a stroll. And Daniel? Yes. Tell the CEO of your apartment that she just saved her project manager from a very long, very boring night of manual stress testing. Tell her the pancake protocol has been officially authorized by the board of directors. Daniel smiled, hitting the down button. I think she'll be very pleased to hear that, Claire, but she might still demand a formal report on the chocolate chip situation. As the elevator doors closed on the 28th floor, the office went dark. The skyscraper stood tall over the city, a monument of glass and steel. But inside, for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't lonely. It was a promise of a new morning. The ride down in the elevator was quiet, but it wasn't the awkward silence of two colleagues. It was the comfortable quiet of two people who had just survived a storm. They stepped out into the crisp New York night, the air smelling of rain, diesel, and asphalt. Do you ever feel like you're doing too much, Daniel? Claire asked as they stood on the sidewalk, waiting for their cars to arrive. I mean, truly, between the house, the school, the grieving, and the 9 to 5. Does it ever feel like the walls are closing in on you? Daniel leaned against a stone pillar, looking up at the slice of moon between the skyscrapers. Every single day, he admitted honestly. There are mornings where I'm so tired I can't remember where I put the cereal. There are nights where I sit in the dark and wonder if I'm failing her, because I can't be both parents. I worry about the years I'm missing because I'm stuck in a screen. He looked at Claire. The corporate world tries to convince us that being human is a liability. It tries to make us believe that if we feel, we lose our edge. But I think the opposite is true. My daughter is the reason I'm a better manager. Because of her, I have more patience. Because of her, I can see the person behind the employee. I don't see human capital anymore. I just see people who have their own pancake protocols waiting for them at home. That's a better way to lead." Claire nodded slowly, the wind whipping a strand of hair across her face. "I've spent 10 years trying to be a machine. I thought that if I showed a single crack, the board would find a way to replace me. I thought my value was in my lack of needs. But tonight, when you made that joke, I realized that I've been so focused on the view from the 40th floor that I forgot how to walk on the ground. I forgot that I have a pulse." She looked at her car pulling up to the curb, a sleek black sedan that looked like it belonged to a ghost. "I don't even know what I like to do on a Tuesday night, Daniel. I don't have a protocol. I don't have a drawing waiting for me on a sofa. I just have a very expensive, very quiet apartment in Tribeca." "Then find one," Daniel suggested. "Start small. Go to that late-night bookstore on 5th. Buy a book that has nothing to do with tech or leadership. Read it with the phone off. Remind the Claire server that she's allowed to go offline once in a while. The world won't stop spinning if you're not watching the dashboard." Claire smiled, a genuine, soft expression that reached her eyes. "I think I might just do that. Thank you, Daniel, for the logic fix and for the joke. You have no idea how much I needed to laugh today. It felt like the first breath of air in years." "Anytime, CEO," Daniel winked. "Just don't tell the DevOps team I told you to go offline. I'll never hear the end of it, and they'll start wanting Friday afternoons off." As Daniel watched her car drive away, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had walked into that office as a man afraid of an ultimatum, but he was leaving as a man who had changed the trajectory of a company's soul. He realized that leadership wasn't about the loudest voice or the longest hours. It was about the courage to be vulnerable at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. He drove home through the thinning traffic, his mind already shifting gears. He pulled into his driveway, the lights of his small house glowing like a lighthouse. He walked inside, the familiar, comforting smell of vanilla and old books greeting him at the door. Emma was still on the sofa, her head resting on a pile of cushions. Her sketchbook was open on her lap, and her pencil had fallen to the floor. Daniel knelt down and looked at the drawing. It wasn't a car or a house. It was a picture of him, wearing a cape, standing in front of a giant computer with a spatula in his hand. Underneath, in her neat, 10-year-old handwriting, were the words, "The hero of the 28th floor. He always comes home for the pancakes." Daniel felt a thick lump form in his throat. He realized that he had spent the whole day worrying about a 3% lag in a server, but his most important system was already operating at 100% efficiency. He had been so focused on the deadlines that he had almost missed the miracle. He gently carried Emma to her bed, tucked her in, and whispered, "The CEO of the apartment is safe, pal. We're all safe." He sat in his kitchen for a few minutes, drinking a glass of water, listening to the quiet of his home. It wasn't the sterile, cold quiet of the office. It was the warm, living quiet of a family. He realized then that the most powerful thing a person can do is remind someone else that they are human. And that sometimes a single joke is more effective than 1,000 polished spreadsheets. The next morning, the office was buzzing with an electric but different energy. Rumors had already spread that the CEO had left before 10 p.m. The VPs were whispering in the break room, wondering if something was wrong or if a merger had fallen through. They expected a storm. They expected Claire to arrive in a fury, demanding more hours to make up for the lost time. But when Claire Donovan walked through the doors at exactly 8:30 a.m., she didn't look angry. She looked rested. She was wearing a softer color than her usual charcoal gray, and she actually paused to say, "Good morning" to the receptionist by name. In the morning briefing, the boardroom was tense. The VPs had their reports ready, their faces set in the usual mask of grim, calculated determination. They were waiting for the Ice Queen to bark orders and demand the stress test data. Claire stood at the head of the table. She didn't open her laptop immediately. She looked around the room, making eye contact with every person there, seeing them as people rather than productivity metrics. "I've reviewed the progress on Project Horizon," she began, her voice clear, resonant, and calm. And I've decided to make a permanent change to our operational structure. Effective immediately, we are implementing a company-wide hard stop policy. No meetings after 5 p.m., no work emails between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. unless it is a level 1 emergency. A collective gasp rippled through the room. One of the senior directors, a man who prided himself on his 14-hour days, started to object. But Claire, the launch, the investors, the competition won't stop. The investors want a stable product, Claire interrupted, her tone firm but noticeably kinder. And a stable product is only built by stable people. We've been running this company like a machine, but we are not machines. We are a team of humans who have lives outside this glass tower. If we can't build a platform within 40 hours a week, then we are not the geniuses we claim to be. We need to work smarter, not longer. She looked at Daniel in the back of the room. He gave her a subtle, supportive nod that only she noticed. We will hit our deadlines, Claire continued, but we will do it without burning our souls. Now let's look at the integration lag. Daniel, you had a fix that focuses on long-term stability? The meeting proceeded with a focus and a level of creativity the company hadn't seen in years. Without the fear of an all-nighter hanging over their heads, the engineers were solving problems in minutes that used to take hours. The Ice Queen was starting to melt, and in her place was a leader who people actually wanted to follow into the fire. Later that afternoon, a small package arrived at Daniel's desk. Inside was a handwritten note in a high-end, limited edition Lego set, the one Emma had been asking for. To Emma, your father tells me you're a formidable CEO. Thank you for reminding me that even the most complex systems need to go offline to stay healthy. To Daniel, thank you for the pancake protocol. It's the best strategic advice I've received in years. See you at 5 sharp, no exceptions. Daniel smiled and tucked the note into his pocket. He finished his work, sent his final reports, and at exactly 5 p.m., he closed his laptop. He didn't feel the need to look busy or stay until the CEO left. As he walked toward the elevators, he passed Claire's office. Her door was open, and she was already packing her bag. She caught his eye and gave him a playful, mock-serious salute. The world didn't change overnight. The tech industry was still fast, and the city was still loud. But on the 28th floor of that skyscraper, the definition of important had shifted fundamentally. Daniel Brooks walked out into the golden afternoon light of Manhattan. He had a science project to build, a daughter to hug, and a very important date with a stack of blueberry pancakes. Because true strength isn't about how long you can stay in the office. It's about having the courage to know when it's time to go home. And as the sun set over the New York skyline, painting the glass in shades of pink and gold, Daniel realized that he wasn't just a project manager. He was a hero, and that was the only title that would ever truly matter in the final lap of his life. If you believe that the best leaders remember the people behind the work, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments, what's the funniest or most meaningful moment you've had at work that changed your perspective?